job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years' experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Let's welcome to the show Cathy Doherty. Cathy is the owner of the People Navigator, which teaches business owners and founders how to avoid hiring and holding on to horrible people. Using over 3 decades in business, from helping her dad run his own business to running successful HR teams, and more recently supporting other business owners on all things people. Cathy, you're very, very welcome onto the show today. And I know just from that very short introduction there that our listeners are going to get a lot and take a lot away from today's conversation. So where do we find you today, Cathy?
I am in the gorgeous Belfast in Northern Ireland. And nice peaceful spot in Belfast.
Oh, that sounds nice. Is there such a thing as a nice peaceful spot in Belfast?
I seem to have found it. It's the perfect balance between not too far from the city centre, but enough green space around me that on lovely, when it gets to lovely days and you've got birds singing and trees out and you can just pretend you're anywhere in the world you want to be at any time you want to be.
Sounds idyllic, that. Completely. Sounds very refreshing, actually. Very refreshing.
Well, I do my bit for wildlife as well to encourage it into my garden all year round. So that helps.
Okay. Well, Cathy, we're going to have a very short conversation. And then we're going to get into the question of why we're really here, to hear all about your worst interview ever. And I'm really intrigued. I purposely don't want to know beforehand because I always like to be shocked or surprised around this topic. And believe me, I have been shocked and both surprised at some of our previous guests and their stories. They've been sometimes horrific and they've been sometimes really hilariously funny. I'm not sure what way you're going to go, Cathy. I'm pretty good at reading people, but I don't know what way you're going to go today. So I'm really looking forward to finding out. But before we get to there, okay, I'd love to know a little bit more about you and a little bit more about your business and how you got to where you are today. So if I could just pass that question over to you, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, I suppose for me it all began. I was 7 years old, sitting at Dad's big desk in our dining room when he'd started his business, and I was thumping my fists on the desk and shouting to my imaginary employees and barking orders to them. And I knew at one point I wanted to have my own business. Thankfully, while I was copying what I had seen on TV, my understanding of what it means to be a boss has evolved since then, although from my experience, it hasn't for everybody. So that then led me, I knew I wanted to do something in the business world. And I'd then had the opportunity to work with Dad on his business. But he'd always involved me in decision making and thought processes. And then eventually, after my degree in the financial services industry and things like that, I decided I wanted a more people-centered career, and eventually then went into the people culture kind of space and was there for a couple of decades. Still am, but it's enjoyable, the messiness of people. I love the messiness. My dad, he still would sometimes say, "Oh, you work in black and white," which I did as a teen, as we all did as teenagers. But I remind him that no, these 20 odd years in the people space, I work in the greys. The grey zone is pretty much where you work when it comes to people. And that's what I love. I like the unpredictability of it.
Well, that's strange. I'm very similar as well. I do like a bit of unpredictability. Don't get me wrong. I'm normal, like any other, whatever normal means. I do like a bit of structure in my life. However, the unpredictability of it, and maybe my choice of my favorite chocolate might explain this. A bag of Revels. You just don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if it's going to be a raisin. You don't know if it's coffee, an orange, a toffee, a
Or
Maltese.
just
You just
shove them
don't
all in
know.
and get a mix.
Is that how you do with the employees? Is it? Just get them all together. We'll work it out. We'll work it out.
See what pans out, you know. See if anybody's left standing.
But I tell you, when I worked with employees and I had employees, of which there were many, I really loved that part of my job and that part of my role. However, it was probably one of the most challenging parts of it. But again, probably the most rewarding part of it all
Mm.
was seeing someone who thought they couldn't and ended up doing what they thought they couldn't, and the joy that brought to them and to me to see somebody else sort of succeed with a little bit of guidance and support from me, that's absolutely fantastic.
It's seeing them
But
get that little pep in their step, you know,
yeah,
that here, I can actually do this and I'm willing to take on more because I also knew that my manager had my back, that they
yes.
weren't going to throw me under the bus when something, if it went wrong at some point, and not support me.
Yeah, and I think that very neatly brings us into our first real question with regards to your career and in your business to date. You must have had along the way some absolute great and wonderful successes along the way. Would you like to share one of those with the listeners and myself?
Suppose I've got a couple of them. I suppose, I mean, like, one was obviously working with Dad's business, and getting to support him in running the business and getting much closer to the employee side of things, and helping him through that. But a big one for me was when I was working in the Shetlands, and a client had asked me, they were taking over the running of a power station, and they'd won the contract, and it had happened previously. But the ones who the existing contractors, um, their time was coming to an end. But when they took on the contract, things didn't quite go to plan. It didn't run smoothly. There was a lot of mistrust, a lot of skepticism in terms of for my client coming into this new environment. It was also a unionized workforce. Most of them were from the Shetlands, lived on the Shetlands, and with an island mindset in terms of you are separated. They're closer to Norway than they were to Edinburgh. Um, so in terms of that community feeling and supporting each other. And so the client then tasked me with smoothing the waters in terms of, that takeover of the contract and all the things associated with that in terms of the documentation side. But for me, the more interesting side was the people and building those relationships and understanding, where mistrust happened in the past and working
Mm,
on that with my client to build that trust for the future. And I mean, I did that very successfully. My contract kept getting extended by the client because there was such trust in me by both the client and the workforce that actually it would be a fair process. Um, and that's kind of what I take into everything is that, there's fairness in there.
hmm
But it's the fact that, when I see a client who is usually, and I mean, like in that circumstance, the client, the individual who I was contact was an employee, they weren't the business owner, they were an employee, they were a manager, and it was their responsibility. This is one of the many to have that happen as seamlessly as possible. So that was where, it was a big, I thoroughly enjoyed and got a lot from that to see that actually I made their lives easier when it came to that as well. But then it's also then working with the smaller business owners, who wouldn't have a dedicated resource and seeing the look of relief on their faces when they have, someone like me guiding them, but
hmm
also when similar to you were talking about an employee who kind of finds that they can, when
hmm
they thought maybe they couldn't. It's the same when it comes to me guiding a business owner that actually they can handle a lot of circumstances, that arises. And it's giving them not just the capability and confidence, but also the competence to deal with
Yeah.
situations in the workplace that they don't shy away from issues or they don't have it so that actually it's the employees running the business,
Yeah.
which you need that strategic overview of the business owner going, hold on a second, this is a business, it's actually properly managing your business and being
The-
the boss of your business and
I
having the
think
right people with you.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we could really go off on a tangent here. You and I were this is an area where I have lots and lots and lots of questions and ideas. However, that's not what we're here for today.
Yep.
But one of the just maybe probing questions for me would be with regards to smoothing over with different people.
Hmm.
You must by now have worked out how to read people quite well and be able to understand what their motivations are, and then how do you deliver that? That in itself, I know for what I do, that is one of the main points and parts of my role and my business is to work out what motivates people.
Yeah.
I think jokingly we can use the analogy of the carrot and the stick, but there's a lot more now than a carrot and a stick.
Yes.
A lot more. When I was being brought up in this world of retail where I came from, it was referred to as an arm around the shoulder or a foot in the backside. That was the two options that we were given and trained as managers. So it took me a long time, probably similar to yourself, to experience all of the different experiences and then to put something in place and a plan that is actually fair to everyone. And I felt the more I treated people more fair, the more they treated me more fair.
That, I mean, like, it's that fairness which isn't always appreciated.
No,
Uh,
no.
Especially when usually with fairness comes compromise. And that's sometimes depending on the relationships and depending on how those have been established. But yes, no, in terms of understanding people and being able to read them, there's always you understand it within, but
Hmm.
then sometimes you have to wait to see how it actually manifests itself within that individual. But what I mean, like I do kind of describe in terms of the manager role within many aspects is if you're at a bowling lane and you know the inflatable rubber things that they put,
Yes.
to stop the bowling ball falling into the gutter,
Yes.
um, that's largely the role of the manager. It's not to control, in terms of the pinging and ponging of where the employee goes. It's just to kind of stop them going into the gutter, and to kind of create that learning experience where
Hmm.
employees will grow and learn. And certainly in terms of the kind of people most people want to work with, not just even in terms of to be a managing of, but your colleagues. You
Hmm.
want people to kind of to actually put the effort in to feed into the team work environment, to contribute and to hold their own weight.
Yeah.
Um, and that
But I
will mean
suppose,
different things at different times.
but I suppose then that for me anyway comes right back to who you employ
Mm-hmm.
and how you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I done a lot of research and a lot of deep thinking, let's say, into this whole aspect of the right person for the right job at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like something completely new to an organization that I used to work for. But what it did do was it reduced the staff churn. It
Mm-hmm.
gave us happier staff and staff that actually wanted to be there,
Yeah.
which is a huge, huge benefit. Regardless of the role, regardless of the job, there are horses for courses, I'm absolutely sure of that. And I always like to find the person who wants to do the job and can also do the job.
Yes.
They are much easier to manage. They're much easier to motivate because their motivation comes from a place of happiness and want as opposed to do and be forced.
Yes. I kind of describe it as desire and potential. So
Yeah.
you've got the desire has to be there, and that's
Yeah.
where for me, in terms of that motivation comes from within. You can
Hmm.
only provide the environment for somebody, but I often kind of would say that motivation actually comes from within the person, their inner desire to do that role or I mean, for smaller businesses, usually you need to wear many hats,
Hmm.
because that's the nature of small business. And it's finding those individuals who actually would enjoy that. who like maybe a core element of the role is something,
Yeah.
so that's their stability in terms of the routine. But there's
Mhm.
also then the different aspects, particularly in smaller businesses, where you might need somebody to also do something else, to support the business, because you don't have the luxury of having everything so siloed, nearly like a production line. You don't necessarily have that luxury of one person just for that one particular task. So there might need to be that flexibility, which for me, I think makes it interesting, but not for everybody.
Well, that's very true, and you're right. We as business owners, both you and I, know that we have to go between hats, not every day, but even every situation that we find ourselves in within that day. The one day we might be the cleaner, the next day, the next hour we might be the salesperson, the next hour we are the CEO, the next hour we are the advisor, the next hour we are setting all of our hats down so we can try to be ourselves. And you're right, it's very, very challenging. And it would be wonderful had we something in place that we could go, do you know what, here's some HR stuff, where you go do that. But I suppose that's where people like yourself come in, and your business, the People Navigator, it comes in with for all things people.
Yeah, and focusing for the small business owner,
Mm.
small and medium sized, who don't necessarily need that dedicated resource. But there's a
Hmm.
lot of things that they themselves, I'm not necessarily talking about administration and things like that, because there's software to do that. And believe me, I hate paperwork. I would
Oh, you
rather
and
at
me
this.
both.
Yeah, that's why I'm embracing cautiously AI
Ah.
in terms of what I can do for that. But when it comes to the business owner, the more that they can understand themselves in terms of how they can also prevent creating unnecessary situations
Mm.
through their own reactions, responses. But the key moment of being able to prevent most issues, not all issues, and situations change and all of that, but the key moment that you can prevent difficulties or reduce the difficulties arising is your hiring process.
Hmm.
It's like when I take the approach that it's like any kind of system, any type of computer system, rubbish in, rubbish out. It's just
Yep.
that, making sure you're hiring with intent, because that doesn't just make your life easier, is that nobody wants to work with horrible people.
Hmm.
We've all worked with horrible people more than likely. And, we kind of wonder sometimes how on earth did they get the job?
Hmm.
And sometimes, but also people change, so you can have somebody who didn't start out horrible and life circumstances happened and, kind of went down that path. But for the majority of times, you can have pretty good near gatekeeping kind of processes, and, that interview process where you can potentially filter out most of the undesirables that
Yeah.
wouldn't be suited for your business. It's not to say they're not suited for somebody else's business,
Yeah.
but just for your business and your people, that you want a culture that's enriched, that people can be personable, they can be professional, they can be their best selves. I mean, like, I know it's a bit of a cliche and things like that, but just to be the better version of themselves in the workplace. They don't
But
necessarily have to bring the whole selves, but just,
no, but it's a cliche for a reason.
yeah.
Be your best self. Well, what's the alternative? To
Because
be not your best self.
we
Why?
all have
Why?
off
Why?
days, but you just don't
Yeah.
want that to be most of the time.
No, no. You see, I have a little double-edged saying that I live by, and it's how we do something is how we do everything.
Mm,
Now that to me drives my behaviors, drives my thoughts, drives my own processes. So that means we show up with intention, we show up with passion, we show up with energy. If not, then that's how everything is seen thereafter. And I do when I look at people, and you're right, we all have off days, but when I deal with people, when I look at people and what they bring to the table, whether it be our first meeting or our 10th meeting, it's how I see them.
mm.
It's how I foresee them in the future as well. Potentially, if this is what they're bringing now, what are they going to bring in the future? Potentially a lot, potentially not a lot. Depends on how they
It's
are.
also keeping in mind as well our so we only have the one first impression, but that impression changes every 30 seconds,
Hmm.
especially early on. So it's that What do you want that really first impression to be? Because that can does affect everything that follows after, in
Absolutely.
terms of the context, your first encounter, whatever that is. And that can be from a first email. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be the interview. It can be the first initial contact. And particularly in Northern Ireland, we're 1.5 degrees of separation. And there's bound to be, you're bound to have come in contact with someone before. But even then, it can be a case of even with where, across the world,
Yeah.
there's smaller degrees of connection between people. So
Okay.
it's keeping that in mind, as
Yeah,
well.
you have to be mindful of those things, as you quite rightly said. In a small country like Northern Ireland, you have to be mindful that that 1.5 degrees of separation is there. And I hear it quite often, and I see it in practice quite often when you go out somewhere or network or go to a meeting and you go, oh, you're such and such and such and such.
Hmm.
And it really is a small world. But even going back to what you were saying about the hiring and getting that hiring process right from the very beginning, there must, it sounds like you would use almost almost a value-based hiring system with regards to what your values are you probably would like to see in an employee, especially if they're going to be working for you in your business. But if you're going into other businesses, do you take that into consideration? Do you take their values and their principles and their mission and what they're trying to achieve? Do you take all of that into account when you're maybe hiring on their behalf?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I do the hiring with them. So I
Okay.
don't do it separate from them. Um, every business, I kind of describe every business and their culture as a personality.
Mm.
So it's like each individual personality. So you've got to work with the personality of that business. And that sometimes can be part of the initial part of working with a client, is that they kind of have an idea, but they've maybe not formalized it in any way that they can then use that. Um, and when it comes to, yes, certainly, I mean, values is a key part, and usually the first interview question that I ensure my clients ask is it based around their values. That
Mhm.
is front and center. It's part of the application process. It's part of, the actual interview itself. And there's
Mhm.
other aspects of that selection process that, you need to tailor depending on the business and the role
Mhm.
and those sorts of things. But
But
then when you've got those defined, it's then applying those through the rest of your processes and approaches within the business. And it's not just, the wallpaper, it's not just stuck on a mug, it's
Mhm.
actually real and felt in the business. And the one question when I carry out surveys of clients' employees is that usually it's asking about the values. And the key thing I'm always looking to hear from them is that, but that's just who we are.
Mm. That's
That
yep.
is us. That's what we do. It's how we do it,
Yeah.
so, and once you kind of are getting that, then that actually it's not just something on, on
On a
basically the
wall on a
glass
mug.
door. Yeah, basically it's not just words, it's actually the actions and the doings of your people. And that in turn, when you have that quite clear, that then comes across in your selection process as well, without you necessarily having to say it. You're being quite explicit about it. Um,
Hmm.
and that will then attract the kind of people who find that appealing, who want to work in that kind of environment. And,
Yes.
rather than there can be the usual kind of what I kind of call the blah, kind of values that are kind of, well, duh, you know?
Yeah, that honesty. I mean, that one
Yeah,
always drives me insane. Well, why do we have to stipulate that we
yeah,
want someone with honesty? That
yes.
that to me is an absolute minimum
Yeah.
requirement if
You're
you're coming to work
wasting
for me.
words on your values list by stating
Absolutely.
honesty.
Yes.
You're wasting a basic fundamental of being a human being,
I know.
which
I
we
know
know
we
not
joke.
everybody is.
I know. Well, that's what I was going to say. I know we joke, but not everybody is.
Yeah.
However, you're right. I think we waste a little bit of wording and a little bit of energy and a little bit of space on the website to
Hmm.
go that we're honest and we
Yeah.
tell the truth. I almost sarcastically in the background feel like I should be clapping, going, "Well done," and it's like, wow, okay, okay. But even based on our own values and our value systems, that drives our behaviors. That drives a business's behaviors and what they actually do. And you said about the doing. Well, that is correct. That is the doing. That is the behaviors of those people. And finding someone who their desire is they want to do that role, whatever that role may be. Could it be cleaning? Could it be CEO? Could it be administration? Could it be speaking with clients? Whatever their desire is, it's really what we should be looking at hiring someone for.
Hmm.
Not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole because they're available and they're going to accept the role and we need that role filled in 2 weeks' time or we lose that position and that's it. It-
Usually, when it comes to these things, it's disaster can come from desperation, really. Desperation on behalf of the individual seeking the job
yeah,
and the individual seeking somebody to fill the job, where
yeah,
it's a case of that sense of urgency, but desperation. So the decision isn't actually an intentional decision, it's a reaction to a situation where there's actually a genuine mismatch,
yeah,
and that
absolutely.
doesn't tend to end well if it's not addressed quickly
You're
in
you're
some
absolutely
way.
no, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. When I work with my clients on a one-to-one basis, and they're telling me they're going for X and Y job, and we'll discuss the job and we'll discuss going through and so on. One of the very first things I always do to them, do with them, is work out what their values are,
Mhm.
and then work out what the values of that business they're going for. More times than not, if those values do not align, that's when they start to really panic
Yeah.
about the interview. It's when they start to get really, really over anxious about the interview. But what if, but what if, but what if? And that's when they're starting to doubt themselves because they know they're going against they're having an internal conflict
Yes.
because they're going against their complete value system.
Yeah.
And when you break this down, this is really about values. We should be hiring for values. We should be hiring for desire. We should be hiring for passion so that every organization gets the people who want to do the role and want to do it well. You will save money on HR issues. Well, we can't eradicate them all, but you will definitely, definitely save money on HR issues by just getting the right people in the right jobs at the right time.
It's a prevention is better than cure kind of
Absolutely.
approach, but it's
Absolutely.
that near where you have almost like a 50-50 split. I generally like to kind of look at the 50% are the values, the behaviors, that all these things, and then 50% is then the technical stuff, the
Mm.
actual day to day. And sometimes it's that journey I mean, like for some employers. I remember years ago, one of my very early roles in HR, and this team was having difficulty with graduates coming in and assuming they knew what to do, and it was in a science-based role. And the graduates would come in and would just carry on and were making mistakes, and they weren't asking questions, they weren't asking for advice. And I was fairly new into the business, it was a very big business, and I had suggested an assessment, and they looked at me and went, "Oh, people sitting down at desks and making a set." And I went, "No, no, 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 no. Something that's relevant." So I had suggested setting up lab type conditions using things that weren't dangerous, um, but putting things around the lab, like hanging up like a lab coat, putting protective goggles in places and having the instructions done out very vaguely so that they would have to ask questions.
Okay.
And so we had then a scoring sheet of, well, what questions would you want them to be asking to clarify? And so we had this list of questions. And I said, so the more questions they ask, the higher the score they get. So the ones who don't ask questions get a lower score and don't get on to the next stage.
Oh, I
It's the
love that.
ones who then who ask the questions, who want to clarify the behaviors that you're looking for, that you need on a safety issue, that you're encouraging that. But you don't brief them that, it's just more a case of ask any questions you need to clarify. And that was
Okay.
all they would get, as well as the outline of the brief. So it was more a case of, are they naturally the type to ask questions? You know,
Oh,
can
you're
you
working in psychology here.
That's a large
Uh,
part of what.
Well, I love that. I absolutely love that. That's a real passion of mine is understanding the psychology and the behaviors of people.
Yeah.
And what you have just suggested is a wonderful method to weed out certain individuals
Hmm.
that will set the place on fire
Yes.
because they didn't think to ask a question.
Yes.
And how much time, money, effort is that going to save in the future? Potentially a lot.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
love that.
Well,
Kathy, I
the
absolutely love
team were
that.
converts. The team were absolute converts after they'd gone through that, and the people that they had then in terms of the team, they were like, "Yep, okay, we know we were skeptical, we know we were hesitant, but hats off, it worked. We got the right people, and we've managed to actually avoid certain disasters that had previously arisen from people not
Wow.
asking questions."
Wow, that's amazing. That is fantastic. That is really, really good. I really like that. But Kathy, if you were to look for one particular value in an employee, any value, what is that one value you'd be looking for?
Oh, I can never go for one, but there's three.
No, Kathy, no, just one, please, one.
Um, humility.
Oh,
Humility in the sense that understanding that there's more to learn. There's
mm,
always more to learn. There's nobody who is a complete expert, because to be an expert in one thing, you have to be an expert on everything that interacts with that one thing. I like the term specialist as opposed to expert. Um,
mm,
but when it comes to any role, especially when you're starting out or when you're very experienced, there's always more to learn. And it's that understanding. There's more to learn in terms of the subject, but also from other people, and from other people where it might not be obvious in terms of where learning can come from. But it's that humility to accept that there's always more to learn.
and you're right. There's always more to learn. I would say for me, I'm a lifelong learner. That's how I would
Mm,
describe myself. No matter what question I'm asked, I'm always thinking, why was that question asked? Did
mm-hmm,
I not explain that correctly? Is there more to this that I needed to give to this person?
mm-hmm,
Because a question, someone asking you a question, is a massive indicator that either you haven't said everything fully, or they haven't understood it, or you haven't simplified it in a manner that they understand. And
mm-hmm.
once you start thinking like that, everything changes for you.
Yeah,
Everything changes. You become so much easier to work with and for
yeah.
because you're curious about everything. Nothing's too much. You're curious about everything. And I
But
would
you're
if I
also
say
but you're
again,
also
sorry.
willing to listen as well. You're willing to listen.
Yeah. And I think both you and I know that listening is a massive part of communication. It's not
Hmm.
the actual talking part, it's the listening part. And
It's the
then
one
how
mouth,
we
two
do we
ears.
yes, well, that's it, isn't it? One mouth, 2 ears. I think I was told that many's a time when I was younger by a parent
Yes, me
or
too.
so.
My dad's nickname for me used to be Chattery Cath or Cast the Gas or all these sorts of things. So as again, one of these, and this will be the same for anyone in terms of, the impressions that people had of you as a child and as a teen, and nearly letting them go, not necessarily carrying them with you. And these can be the negative as much as the positive.
Yeah.
Um, is that I remind dad that my listening skills have vastly improved since I was a teenager, that I do listen a lot more, and that was learned. So even a complete chatterbox like me can learn to be a really good listener. So it's one of those that all of these things can be learned if
Yeah.
there's a desire to learn them.
That's it, isn't it? And we weren't born with any of these skills that we have, and like you said, a skill can be learned.
Mhm.
It's not that we don't have it right now, but we can learn it if we so wish and so desire. And it's always that little saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I have sort of adapted that slightly and said you can't teach an old dog new tricks unless he or she wants to.
Yes, very much so.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
Because there's people there who will consider themselves as old dogs and they're starting businesses from
Mm-hmm.
scratch, from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So that totally goes against that saying.
Yes. I've
And
never
because
agreed
they have
with
the
that.
desire. No, nor I, nor I. I've never agreed with it at all. Never agreed with it. But if we are sort of steering this conversation back to this interview process and
Mhm.
the the experiences you've had in the past and sitting on those panels for organizations, you must see a lot of people come through that you think, oh my word, they're fantastic. They're really, really fantastic. You start keeping those ones, those really good ones over to the side. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, you have two almost identical, almost, fantastic. If I had the money, I would employ both of them.
Mhm.
How do you decide which one?
Yeah, I mean, like, and I really don't like using a pure metric kind of measure, where you'll use a scoring system and weighted scores,
Mm,
although sometimes it ends up being that. But that's where I think in terms of your actual hiring process is in terms of whether you give then the weighting on the values over the technical, so the the values and the potential over somebody who's maybe technically brilliant, but where you have two people who are as brilliant in every way as each other,
hmm
sometimes it does come down to also taking account of anti-discrimination legislation and requirements depending on your jurisdiction. That is sometimes where you end up going because there is no other way. Or ideally, that the business actually does actually have budget to keep both and to take on both because there is that recognition that actually we can use both. Maybe in slightly different, that one for that role and that one for maybe another role. And that has happened where when you do find two amazing candidates, that are just amazing talent and you can't, you want to keep both, but where that's not an option, usually it does come down to a metric, which I don't usually like. But then that's when the follow-up in terms of if somebody isn't successful, it's then the follow-up to that. The
mm,
communication piece that comes after that from the business in terms of actually it was very, very close, but we only have one position. But would you like to stay in terms of on our list that the next available opportunity I mean, we would love to have you for that. And it can be that bittersweet, but it's still I kind of see the whole selection process is a PR opportunity for every single business. It's a
yeah.
PR communications opportunity. And it's how you then, I mean, the ideal is that even if somebody doesn't get a job, they come away with a really good impression, a really good experience of you as an individual taking part in that process, but also of the business in terms of how they handle things.
Yeah.
Because you still might want that person to come in, but also you might encounter that person as their potentially a client,
Yeah.
so it's seeing that actually it's always a two-way process, from the individual, the interviewee, and from the interviewer. It's not this is all driven by the business. It's also then the interviewee themselves. So, but
Mm.
when it comes down to that choice between two brilliant people, where possible, take both.
Well, that's easy to say when you've got the money and the
But if
the
you don't,
capacity to do that. But
then
if you
you've
don't,
got to make sure then that you could stand by your decision, that if you were challenged by it, say if it was that close, that
yeah.
say if somebody felt disgruntled, but that again comes down to your entire experience and the communication process of how people feel that it actually was a fair process.
Do you think sometimes the questions that a candidate asks during an interview when they have an opportunity to do so, do you think that sometimes sways the interviewer's judgment, decision-making process?
I know it does.
You know it does. Okay, good, because I know it does also. But what has been your favorite question someone has asked and you sort of sat back and went, "Oh, that's nice. I like that."
Usually it's been more along the lines of how they can help the business.
Mm,
That it's less of how are you going to help me? What are you going to do for me? It's more how can I grow with the business and, demonstrate in terms of, these aspects of myself for the business. And that's usually the less self-centered questions are usually the ones that, or where they actually have done their homework on the business. And so the question they've asked is not only relevant to that particular business
Mm-hmm.
and the role, but actually how they can contribute to the business. How they can also then, where they've pointed out, maybe I have experience in this area and I know it's not relevant to that role, but would there be an opportunity for me to use that within the business? Those sorts of things. It's showing those transferable skills that actually the individual is broader than maybe what the panel sees there and then. So showing their potential is always that's always the really nice kind of, how can I contribute more?
Okay.
How can I contribute in a different way, not just in this role, if you were to hire me, you know.
When you are hiring me, yes.
When on my first day,
Presumptuous, presumptuous, yes. Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes I do like someone who's a little bit confident in
hmm
themselves and their ability, and I think,
Yes.
oh, okay, yeah, I do like that, even within an interview. Now, we're bordering on the line of arrogance,
Yes.
but we can take it all in good humor as well. I
Yeah.
didn't. The way I always used to hire people was initially thinking to myself, could I work with this person for 40 hours a week? Could I be around this person for 40 hours a week? Are they going
hmm
to bring energy and skills and experience to the business? Or am I going to spend most of my time chasing this person around, watching, catching, doing for this person? If they weren't making my life easier, then they were making it harder.
hmm
Wasn't that they were just making it the same?
Yes.
And that was my thought processes through most of the interviews, regardless of the questions. And the questions are important, yes, obviously, and especially the value-based questions. And then that's where I would start to make those decisions in my head based on their answers.
Well, I
Whereas,
actually have those sorts of questions when it comes to shaping clients, the documentation side of things.
hmm,
Those questions are in their assessment in terms of their reflecting on the interview. Is, could I work with this person?
yeah,
So even after you go through all of the sections, it's a case of, could I work with them? Will they enrich our culture? It's not just, will they, we don't want people who will just blend into your culture, because then you end
yeah,
up with many shades of beige, and that's just blah. You want an actual personality in your business, that people enjoy working there,
yeah,
that every individual brings something. They don't just become the Borg,
hmm,
where you're
hmm,
assimilated and then everybody looks like each other, everybody talks like each other. You see that enough in all the big corporates.
yeah,
Everybody looks the same, dresses the same, talks the same, thinks the same. For most businesses, that doesn't work,
hmm,
so you need that, but it's in the respectful way of difference,
yeah,
and that's where it's that, will they enrich your culture?
yeah. And I love that because they have to enrich it, because they're not enriching, they're taking something.
hmm
And that is my thought process around lots of different areas within the
hmm
business. When you actually think about this, if you've been invited to an interview, you already have passed the minimum and potentially desirable criteria. So a
hmm
lot of even the technical questions on the day during an interview are potentially not really needed, unless you're wanting some more elaboration on your CV,
hmm
on your skills, and it's maybe even just to confirm what you have written down.
yeah
I always tend to find that for me, an interview is more of a cultural fit. It's more of
Mhm.
a, can we or can't we work with this person? Is this person going to bring something? Are they going to take something away? That's where my sort of heart and head always seems to lie. And do
hmm
you know what? We can't like everybody, and that's just okay. But having a personality is very, very helpful during an interview. And alluding back to something you'd mentioned about being able to demonstrate, how can I grow within the business and I have a skill set, can I use this within the business? If someone cannot communicate that,
hmm
that's a huge problem. And what I tend to find, and I sort of found it strangely funny, was that at this moment in time, there's 250,000 job descriptions and jobs available in the UK, and every single one of them, it says on it, must have excellent communication skills. Every single one of them. However, when we get into an interview and we get under a stressful situation, people tend to not be really good communicators at that time.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. It's a real shame because they're clearly sitting there. So the employer values them
But
and
that's also
values them.
where the selection process can. So there's certain roles where you will expect people maybe to be better communicators than others just
Hmm.
because of the very nature of the role. And so that's where adapting the selection process, where you actually maybe include other elements. So those who aren't great talkers, because let's
Hmm.
be honest, quite often the interview is just talking the talk. It's whether they can walk the walk is often the question, even with your BS detectors. Sometimes
Yeah.
they don't get it always right. And that's where your other processes come in. If you accidentally hire someone and they don't walk the walk. But that's where having adaptability within your selection process to let people shine where they're maybe not the best communicators. And sometimes that communication will come with getting to know people. There's a lot of people where, I mean, I've been in interviews where there's been a lot of talking, but they've actually said very little. When
Oh,
you
yes.
look back at your notes and you go, oh, right. Okay.
Yes.
Then I make copious notes. I'm a full scribbler in an interview. I'm listening and writing everything down because that's then what I go back and I then go through all of that because when you're going from one question to the next question, it's hard to remember. And when you're interviewing multiple people in the same day for the same thing, it's very easy to forget what people have said, which is why your notes are super important
Yeah.
because we're not meant to be able to retain all of that information and make it, be able to assess. Um, but that's where it's identifying the people who are just good at talking and the ones who actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah. And do you know what? You mentioned the BS radars.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. We all seem to have them, especially when you're in the world of hiring. We
Mm-hmm.
we tend to have them, and on occasion the odd one does slip past.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about BS,
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at candidates, what is it you're looking for? What is the top three BS stay clear of that you have yourself?
So whilst you're wanting people to talk about what they did, in certain tasks, when quite often you'll ask someone a question and they'll talk about we did this and you're never sure whether they're talking about we the team or we meaning me. And that's where a clarifying question was saying to people, ask, clarify whether it was we the team or we me, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um it's where it comes out quite clearly that it has been the me show. It's all about me and there's no credit given to working with other people in terms of taking responsibility for their own part in a team.
Mm,
Because to be honest, I know teamwork is how most businesses run. Even if you're a solopreneur, there's still teamwork because you rely on other people to help you with certain things. But when it
mhm,
comes to being an employee, um, I mean, like every person, I mean, like you're only as strong as your weakest link, and so everybody needs to be pulling their weight and contributing. So it's always important to then show that yes, I can do this, but it's where there's no reference or no, even when asked, is that there's no real teamwork in there in any aspect. Um, and that has proven in terms of what I've seen over the years. I've interviewed thousands of people, and I've seen how that then impacts where it was a case of, well, maybe they just didn't express themselves well, in the
mm.
interview. And I'm like, well, didn't you probe on that question? You got clarity on that question and you still did get to how they work as a team. So that element where in certain roles, where you don't have to, where it's teamwork isn't quite as important, but teamwork, even when you think about sales roles and, sales, like there's still teamwork that comes with that. And that can be sometimes where people recruiting for sales roles don't give enough weight to the teamwork side of it, because
Yeah.
obviously, people are going, the sales individuals going out and getting the business in, but if they don't have the good teamwork within the business, then that's not going to get delivered.
Yeah.
So you've got these where teamwork is fundamental to everything. And
Was-
somebody who isn't willing to express that or doesn't appear to
Okay.
express that, that's one of
But
the
it's
major
just
ones.
about recognizing that.
And recognizing they're part of a team,
Yeah. Okay.
that
Yeah.
it's not the me show, that actually there is more than them, you know, and there will be more than just them. It's that balance between, you know, I'm wanting to show who I am and capable what I'm capable of,
Hmm.
but also that's always as part of a team. That's
Yeah.
always with other people that I rely on. Again, that's kind of tapping into that humility aspect as well.
Yeah.
They're humble enough to understand that it's not just them. Because I have seen where you've got employees who take the approach that I am literally running this business. If it wasn't for me, this business would fall apart. And they're not doing their thing and not being humble enough to realize actually they are doing their bit, but without all of the other people around them, they wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that creates friction,
Yeah.
especially when that is made obvious to their colleagues. But again, it kind of taps into that that the self-centered, which there's always the element that there's self-care and there's self-centering, which are very different things. And
Hmm.
I know, I mean, like, self-care is important, but the self-centered thing is usually destructive for teams, and that kind of the enriching culture where everybody feels they're part of the same team.
Yeah. They're all a part of achieving the same goal and the same outputs. It's
Yeah.
always very helpful when everybody can see what their piece of work is helping support. I do,
And
I do, I do tend to
appreciating
find that, yeah.
and appreciating the work of others,
Oh yes.
appreciating the work of others as opposed to, the me show.
Yeah, yes. And I'm sure you and I both have come up against these me people more than we would like to mention. However, there are more good
Yeah.
employees than me employees. And I think
Yes.
and I think you know what we've said at the very start in your introduction about those horrible people. Sometimes you find that when it's the me show. Yeah.
And
Sometimes,
and quite
sometimes.
often it's just it's never been addressed. There's not been anybody who's ever had a real conversation with them.
Yeah.
You sometimes out of fear,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes just not feel having the confidence to do that,
Yeah.
and it's just a case of, well, hopefully they'll just leave.
That's a great strategy, isn't it? Hope is not a great strategy. It
No.
is definitely not. No, definitely not. Sitting down, working it out, and taking a bit of action. That's it. That's a good strategy. Now,
But also
now,
in terms of another aspect, I suppose that that would kind of ring alarm bells would be somebody who's looking to be spoon-fed everything.
mm,
There's the learning period when somebody comes in, and that's when an awful lot of patience is required on both parts in terms of, what that means. And depending on the role, that learning period can be a very long period. It can be
mm,
very short. Um, but where somebody is looking to be spoon-fed at every single opportunity, in terms of what are you going to do, how can I do this? And you can pick that up sometimes in their responses, in terms of their answers to questions, and how that interview has gone, but also their interactions with you.
yep,
Um, but it's that again, it's that balance between showing initiative and being the loose cannon,
yep,
the difference between that, and it'll depend on the organization, it'll depend on the role, where that
mm,
balance is. And that's why I kind of described that each business is its own personality, so what will work for one business won't work for another.
yeah. That's why they need people like you, consultants, to come in and weigh it up and analyze it, and then set out best practice. because as you quite rightly said, not everybody's the same, not every business is the same, and they won't always need the same things.
Yes. And
Kathy,
that's where it's the minefield.
and yeah, absolutely. Kathy, we're going to change a bit of pace now.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're going to go into our quick fire round. This is where I will ask you a series of questions, and the very simple answer to those questions is yes, no, pass. Okay,
All
so it's
right.
yes, no, pass. Kathy, you ready?
Yes.
Is it acceptable to wear pajama bottoms to a Zoom interview?
Yes, so long as you don't stand up.
Is it okay to bribe the interviewers?
No.
Is it wise to ask the interviewer for a selfie together at the end?
No.
Should a candidate smile during the interview?
Yes.
Should you answer the first question with a dramatic pause for effect?
Why not? Yes.
Should women wear high heels to an interview?
If they want.
Is that a yes or a no or a pass?
Well, it'll have to be a pass because it's neither yes or no.
Okay. Is it acceptable to ask the interviewer how much they make?
No.
Should you high five the interviewer at the end?
I was going to say it depends on the interviewer and the interviewee. Probably no.
Okay. Should a candidate swear during an interview?
No.
Is it acceptable to bring your mum to the interview for moral support?
No. That
Okay.
was asked. That has been asked. So, but no.
Well, Kathy, the reason I asked these set of questions is that I get asked these questions on a regular basis. And I always find it intriguing to ask somebody else these questions
Mhm.
because we get different reactions. And for the listeners who couldn't see Kathy, is who's not watching us on YouTube, she was in a buckle laughing. She was completely buckled over laughing at some of the questions. She wasn't taking her time to answer. She was just laughing too hard to answer the questions. Now you passed on one, and I think you had more of a comment to make on that, and I want to go back to sort of address that sort of
Mhm.
question. It was, should women wear high heels to an interview? And you said if they want to, but actually, hold on, it's not yes no. It's got to be a pass then because it's not yes no. But where is that thought process then coming from? Is it's okay if they want to?
Yeah, it's absolutely okay if they want to. It also what somebody will should take into account as well as the industry they're going into in terms of the workplace they're going into. Say for example, where there's a health and safety issue where high heels might not be appropriate in terms of work sites and depending on industrial. So that will depend on where the job interview takes place. So that will be part of the thinking, but ultimately come down to if somebody wants to wear high heels, fine. It's completely up to them. But you always take into account, and no matter what you wear, you want to look personable and professional for whatever that role and whatever that industry is. So whether, if you want to wear high heels, go for it. Just take into account the physical environment and the industry that you're going into. But if it's not a health and safety thing, go for it. Male or female, go for it. I don't because I'm crap in high heels.
All right, okay, me either, because I think I would be crap on high heels too. Uh, Kelly, thank you for that. Those questions sometimes go one of two ways. They either throw people or they completely put them, as it did with you, into complete giggles and laughter because they are surprised and shocked that these questions are still being asked in this day and age with so much information out there at this moment in time that those questions are still being asked.
Well, the asking, can you bring your mother to an interview has happened more than once,
Yeah.
and quite often as well. It's been where somebody has maybe, being on the phone to arrange interviews and having been passed over to their mother to make to make the arrangements for the job interview.
Okay.
So yes, it's been interesting.
And would you know what sort of age range that would be from that's been passed on to them?
Most have been at the, school leaver for that kind of age range. Now, there can be differences where, say, maybe it's a reasonable adjustment because if someone has a learning disability and they need a complement, that's totally different. That's a totally different scenario. But it has been quite often, it's been more maybe potentially at apprenticeship, kind of the very entry kind of roles where you have somebody who, they're still very much in the family unit and they haven't quite stretched their own wings yet and created, their own individuality and individual life yet. But it still gives a giggle, at times to go, no, you can't bring your mum. It's not a school report. This is a job interview. You've got to come on your own. And it's not, and sometimes when that's happened, I've had a separate conversation with them to coach them through what the experience will be like and why they can do it themselves.
Yeah.
They don't need their mother with them, to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I think that believe it or believe it not, that is actually becoming more and more prevalent. I
Mm,
would go into quite a lot of schools and teach the interview skills coach,
mm,
or teach interview skills and confidence and mindset for development going into job hunting and employment.
mm-hmm.
And I get asked this question all the time, all the time. And it seems to be getting worse.
Right.
It doesn't seem to be getting less. More and more I get asked this question. Is it okay if I bring my mother? Is it okay if I use my mother or pass the phone to my mother and she can sort out the diary because I don't know how to do that and so on and so forth. And always my thought is, right, okay, well, here's some learning points for everybody and how I design those type of workshops and courses, ensuring that they include what do you do if you get a phone call to
Mm-hmm.
arrange an interview? This is what you do. And this is
Yes.
what you don't do. Something
How
simple.
to make arrangements in
How to
life.
make arrangements in life. That would be a good one actually. I'm taking notes as we're talking here, Kathy. Yep, most definitely. Most definitely. Okay, Kathy, so now we've reached the stage in the interview where we are going to discuss your worst interview ever. Now, this may come from your role as a HR professional, where you were the interviewer, or this might come from you as a candidate going for a role. If you just let us know what that is at the start and then lead your way into my worst interview ever. So, Kathy, over to you.
Well, I'm actually going to give you two, one of each.
Mm,
So, as a candidate, so as an interviewee going into an interview, and it was when I was perfectly content where I was. I was comfortable, but I was looking for the next challenge, and I'd had a telephone interview first, and I was shortlisted. Went into the physical in-person interview, and from the very off, it was quite clear that this was going to be a waste of my time. The There was no personable skills coming from the interviewers. Mind you, keep in mind I was already experienced somewhat at interviewing by this stage.
mm,
So I was in there in an HR capacity. And so I had a pretty good idea of kind of how a good interview can be run. But it felt very standoffish, and I got the impression that they were just going through the motions in terms of they'd already decided who they wanted. They'd already, they were literally doing a tick box exercise. And as a candidate, that is the one of the worst feelings in the world,
yeah.
is that why am I even here? And actually, because I had the experience, I also had the confidence to close the interview early, to challenge in terms of that experience. Had I not had the experience I had, I would have gone through and completed the interview and walked away feeling very disheartened.
Yeah.
But I did call it to an end earlier. We were halfway through the interview and I paused and said, look, I'm getting the impression that um this isn't really your this isn't going to be a right fit, that you're not really wanting to be here. And that's the vibe I'm getting from you. If I've picked that up wrong, please correct me. But otherwise, I don't really think that it's worth continuing with this interview. I've taken time out of my day. I've had to, take a half day from work to come to this. And they didn't dissuade me otherwise. So
Wow.
I said, well, have a lovely rest of your day. I'm sure you've probably found the person you're looking for by the feel of it. So I wish you well, and left the interview. But had I not had, I mean, there's so many things that, based on, and even based on the experience I've had since then, that I would do that I just wouldn't have had the confidence, at different times in my life. But that's
Yeah.
certainly from the interviewee perspective, that
Yeah.
was very disheartening, because you do all the prep, you do all the work before you go in, and then to be felt with that. So
Wow.
I've always made sure that anybody being interviewed has come away with a positive experience. It can be a challenging interview, but you always feel that you were respected as an individual, that you were respected as a human being, and that it wasn't a complete waste of your time.
Well, isn't it wonderful? And don't take this the wrong way. Isn't it wonderful that you went through that in
Hmm.
your particular role? Because now you treat others with the same respect you would like to have been treated with on that day. And I think that's sometimes what happens is those interviewers think that this is a one-way street and it's all about
Hmm.
them,
And it's not
where in actual
never
fact it's
that.
not. And I'm
Hmm.
sure those interviewers sort of set back a little bit and went, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that."
Hmm.
Maybe, maybe you've given them a bit of a second thought because you challenged them and you
Yes.
called out, as you said, called it BS. You called out their BS straight
Yeah.
away. But had you not had the confidence to do that,
Yes.
you'd have been sitting there, you'd have been wasting your time, you'd have been wasting their time. You
Hmm.
would have left with a nasty taste in your mouth about that business and organization, and you would never ever say anything good about them ever again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh, and that
you
and
know
that
you
is
go
no, I was
ahead.
going to say, and that has always fed into, even long before I'd had that experience. I was always very keen to ensure that any candidate, didn't never experience that. And then when I
Mm.
did experience that, it was like, that's why I make sure people don't experience that, because this is how they would feel.
Absolutely. But it's when you think of putting the shoe on the other foot and putting yourself into the candidate's position, their time is valuable as much
Yeah,
as your time being
yeah,
the interviewer is valuable. And why would you bother wasting that? I almost feel insulted if that would happen to me, that they would
yeah,
waste my valuable time because time is something you never get back.
yeah.
Money comes and goes, but time you never get back. You're just
It's one thing
wasting
you can
time.
never make more of. Well, that we
No.
know of so far in terms of the laws of
Well,
physics.
yeah. Be nice whenever we find out, maybe. Whenever we find out. And what's your second story you were going to say?
Yes, so this was as an interviewer.
Hmm.
So it was again, it was before that whole experience, and it was a very busy day of interviews, and I was working alongside a couple of managers in this department, and one individual had a load of really good interviews, and then this candidate had come in, and part way through the interview they just froze. They just completely froze. Nothing was computing anymore. You just saw them just looking, going, I've no idea. And then then they began to tear up. And then before we knew it, they were in floods of tears, having a full near breakdown in the interview. And I mean, the other managers there would start going, "Oh my God, what do we do?" Um, and so I put my arms around the individual, and brought them out, sat them down, had a word with them, and just said and offered, that they want to take a breather. We had
Hmm.
more interviews to go, so and like I mean, like I'd been phoned to let the other candidate, the next candidate was there, so if they wanted to go and take a walk, breath of fresh air, and then come back in,
Hmm.
after we've had this interview, just to kind of collect their thoughts. Um, and I mean, like, it was a horrible experience that you don't like that happening to somebody.
Yeah.
You never want people to experience that or feel that. And the fact that they had, and it wasn't, and like they had said, it wasn't anything to do with, you guys interviewing. It's just I've just taken a complete blank on everything, and I just cannot think. And I then that's when I'd suggested them going for the walk and coming back, and they did say, I don't know. Um, but I will go for a walk. If I'm here at that time, then yes. If I'm not, just continue on. But
Mm.
thank you, for that. I mean, I've had a few off the cuff kind of comments and interviews, but that for me, on a human level, was one of the worst experiences to see somebody just crumble like that, in
Yeah.
terms of their own self-respect. And that's what I was, they were really qualified, and that was what I was keen that they didn't feel that this would put them off any other interviews, that it would
Yeah.
put them off applying for other things. And I'd given them a number and said, look, if you need to talk about this, and talk about approaches, just give me a call. Because it is a really weird environment. Interviews are weird because they're not normal, and they're not a
Yep.
normal experience. So it's okay, but don't let it put you off, pursuing what you want to do.
Well, I mean, in my opinion and in my experience, she's already a winner by turning up because I
Hmm.
know so many individuals that would not turn up,
Yeah, I've had that.
genuinely won't even apply for the position because they know they're going to have to interview. And when they do get the courage to apply for the position and they are offered the interview, they don't turn up.
Hmm.
She was already in the room, so she was already a success to me.
Hmm.
She wouldn't, you and I both would not invite someone to an interview if we didn't think they had the potential.
Yeah, time is precious. It's
Yeah.
you've only got so many that you can interview. So you're going to be selective about the use of that time.
Yeah.
And that's they never phoned me after, but I kind of thought, well, and they didn't stay to go through the interview again.
Hmm.
But, I like to think that, maybe they didn't walk away feeling quite so decimated as they did in that moment. And
Yeah.
quite often what you'll maybe have to rephrase a question or explain it differently, that, maybe someone goes, I don't quite understand what you're asking me.
Yes.
And it can be that people, I always describe that people listen with different ears, so what
Yes.
makes sense to one person, but also what you listen to at different times will make sense in different ways. And so sometimes you do need to rephrase a question depending on the individual in front of you. It might have, 9 out of 10 people might have understood what you meant and it was quite clear, but that 10th person, you need to rephrase it, and that's fine.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the person that sits in front of you as a candidate is very lucky because I know a lot of interviewers and a lot of organizations that would not be as forgiving or supportive or helpful. To the extent where recently, yesterday, I got a text message from a client of mine saying, Kevin, that was the weirdest interview I've ever had. It was as if they all had no personality. They didn't smile. They didn't say hello. They didn't shake my hand. They just got straight into the questioning. He said,
Right.
it was the most weirdest thing I've ever had in my life as a human being
Yeah,
as
I was
well
going to
as an
say no
employee.
human bit to it.
There is no human bit to it at all. It was just being. They were just being in the room and asking questions.
They'll never get human beings with that approach, and
No,
the
well,
right
no.
human beings with
Yeah,
that approach.
no. Well, I mean, what he took away from that was very simple. I don't want to work for an organization
Yeah,
who treats their potential employees like I was treated.
yeah,
Now,
that's what I said. The whole
that's a,
exercise is a PR exercise as well as
yeah.
a business bit, because it's your opportunity to show the business off, to show who you are. It's a two-way conversation. It's a structured conversation. That's
Do,
all it is. So
Kathy, do you know what?
each party's assessing.
Do you know what I tend to find is a real struggle and something potentially you could look at yourself
Mm,
is a job description. And
mm,
many truly awful, awful job descriptions that are out there right now at this moment in time. And when I look at the job descriptions with my clients, all I see is what the company wants from
mm-hmm,
you, what you should have, what they want you to do, when they want you to do it, and how they want you to do it. It is rare, really rare that I see, and for you doing that, this is what you'll get from
mm-hmm,
this. Then again, they'll say this is the salary.
mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, it won't be there. It'll be a salary range. They might even say these are the holidays. Great, super. Those are for me the very basics.
They're very transactional. They're not
Really
really.
are.
this is the feel of the business.
Yes.
This is
You'll
what you
get
get.
yes, you'll get to be involved in a world-changing
Mhm.
company, a life-changing company. You'll get to be involved in the development of research that could cure cancer. You know, it's rare that I ever see a good job description that tells you what you may or may not achieve as an outcome out of joining, or even what is their remuneration, and I cannot say that word, remuneration package that you
Yeah,
will receive.
yeah.
It's rare that I even see that on a job description.
Well,
Why would
quite
I
quite
waste my
often
valuable time
Well, quite
applying for that
often
job?
businesses are cautious in terms of commercial sensitivity about
Hmm.
what they will put on. But there's so much that when I'm rewriting job descriptions, which it is a pain in the ass to do.
Yeah.
But when you kind of near get the structure, then it's just for the business to fiddle with some of the details, but
Mhm.
usually I mean, like I like to include, you know, the people who enjoy working here, these are the kind of the personality traits of the people who enjoy working here. And
Yeah.
that then allows others to go, yeah, it's not my place. Or, oh, I like the sound of that. So I like to ensure that my clients each stage of the process, individuals have an opportunity to go, this isn't the place for me, or this is the place for me.
Yeah.
So people are making conscious decisions. And the way that the job descriptions are written, it's a conversation on a page. It's a
Yeah.
conversation style as opposed to dead language, nearly just literally cold words on a page. It's like any communication piece, particularly on the people side, is an opportunity to engage. And
Yeah.
quite often that's lost. It's just treated
Yeah.
for, well, we have to do this, or
Yeah.
we'll just slap a few things on or we'll copy somebody else's job description and that'll do.
Oh my goodness, I have seen so much of that. Well, you know what? We'll just copy that one. What does it say? It's an administrator. Great. Let's just do that. And it's actually not what they're being hired for.
Yeah.
And again, using a recent example of that is a person I know went for a job interview for a project manager position. When they get in to the interview, they were asked all about a business analyst position. No questions around project management whatsoever. And obviously, that will completely throw them if had they
hmm
not known anything about being a business analyst.
It's
Completely.
like that disaster BBC interview, when they had somebody on, they started asking questions and the
Or
guy
the
goes,
taxi driver.
I was just in the lobby, that I'm not
Oh,
actually
yes, that's the
interviewing.
taxi
Yeah.
driver. Yes.
It's that whole kind of, at least double check that you're talking to the right people for the right role. But I mean, like, that's just, I I categorize that kind of thing as a mix of laziness
Yeah.
and disrespect for people, in terms of you're not giving them the courtesy of being upfront about what it is. And that also takes into account roles where there's crappy elements of it, at least be honest. If
Yeah.
there's and if that's the bulk of the role, then be honest about it. Because you'll find some people actually are attracted to that. And the kind of people who want to do it.
Yeah.
But at least make sure, I mean, a job description will never hold 100% of what everybody does 100% of the time, but
Yeah.
you can give an indication of what that role is going to be like and kind of the typical things that are expected. The typical things that the individual
Yeah.
can be expected to do, or their expected outputs, or who they're going to work with, who they're going to be, you know, working with largely,
Mhm.
all of those sorts of things, but you got to be honest.
You do. You do. Kathy, I think we need to get an offline conversation around job descriptions
Yeah.
because it's a business in itself, for goodness sake. Most definitely. And I think, adding to your list of reasons why people don't do it, I think it's down to, again, a lack of confidence or ability and
Mm,
knowing how to do that. But I love how you said that you have to look at the people who work there and look at their personality traits and then find more people just like them. But find the people who work there who enjoy working there and then
yes.
find more people like them. And
Yes. The
I
people who
love
do
that.
well in those environments,
Yeah.
those are the typical trait. And they can be vast, because you'll have got, particularly diverse groups of people. Um, but there's usually, an undercurrent, depending on the environment. And it's
Yeah.
identifying that undercurrent. And sometimes that's where, there's the struggle of kind of, I don't have time, I need people, but
Yes.
at the cost of making conscious, intentional decisions about
Yes.
those people. And
Yeah.
everyone you bring into your business has an effect on that business,
Mm.
whether, in so many ways. And nobody wants to work with horrible people.
No.
So, and people who don't want to be there but took the job because they needed it.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, we all need to pay bills.
Yep.
We do. We all
Yep.
need to pay bills. That's it. That's the one thing about life, isn't it? We know we're going to have to pay bills. But there's easier ways of doing that in a
Hmm.
job that you want to get out of bed for every morning because you've found something that really aligns with the person that you are and what you want to achieve in life. And how amazing is it when you find those employees and you can bring them together in the one place for the common good of the business? It's
Hmm.
just a fantastic feeling for everybody. I,
Yeah.
and seeing people work at what they're good at and what they enjoy, it's not like work at all. It's not like work at all. Kathy, we have had such a conversation today. I hope our listeners have taken away so much because I know I have taken away so much from this conversation. And we will definitely get another conversation offline
Hmm.
around a couple of different things. But I'm going to try and summarize three takeaways from what we've discussed, which is going to be
Good
a
luck with
real
that.
challenge for me, a real challenge for me. But Kathy, I think I'm up to the challenge today. I think I am. I think I
Go
am.
for it.
So the very first thing I want our listeners to take away from, especially those that live in Northern Ireland, is you don't know who that person might know. And what I mean by that is you don't know who that person on the interview panel might know. They might know your mother, they might know your uncle, your granny, or some sort of relation or friend to you. And the reason I'm saying this is that even if you potentially are thinking, do you know what, this job is maybe not for me after you get into the interview, but you handle yourself well and you leave with dignity and you show respect, potentially they might go, do you know what, I seen Kathy, she was not the right person for this job, but do you know what, maybe she's the right person for this other job that we have. And we've
Hmm.
already interviewed her, we know what she's like, I might give her a ring.
Or I
Hmm.
know somebody who's looking for somebody like that. I'll give them a call and suggest they get in touch with them.
Absolutely. And I just, that's how in my head the word goes round.
Hmm.
You just don't leave that sort of sour taste in anybody's mouth. Even when you're leaving a business, even if it's not on good terms, you never leave a sour taste in
Oh,
anybody's mouth.
oh yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You never leave that. Never leave that.
Don't burn your bridges.
No, definitely not. I liked how you mentioned about being, whenever we were talking about should women wear high heels or not, and you were being very respectful and very intentional with what you were saying regarding being personable and just dressing to impress for the position that you're wanting, as opposed to dressing in a way that you think they want you to do. Yeah, the best way to do this, the best way to find out is that, ring the HR department and ask what is an acceptable method of dress to come to an interview.
Hmm.
Look at their social media posts, see what people are wearing. Now, I will give that with a bit of caution because if we're working in an office, potentially non-client facing, you might see t-shirts and jeans. However, if you're a client-facing person, you might have to be suited and booted and ready to impress on that first instance and first meeting.
Yep.
But there's many ways of finding out how that can be done. Social media, their website, they will never put anything on their website that is going to make them look bad. So look at what they have on their website and
Hmm.
potentially dress one level above that. And one of the other things I really loved, and one of the biggest takeaway for me and for most of the people is whenever you're asked the question, yes, it might be the me show and the I show, but you have to also bring into the room where you're at how you worked within that team and not just it was all about you. We are
Yes.
all cogs in a machine. Yes, let's talk about what place and what things we did as that cog, but also recognize the machine and all the other cogs. Because if they didn't turn like we turned, none of it would work. And
Yes.
I loved how we used that analogy to describe that because again, you and I both sat in thousands of interviews together, not together, but we've sat in thousands of interviews, And that is one thing I look for as well. If it's a specifically team working directly within a small or large team, you're looking for someone to go, yes, this is what I did. However, as part of the team, this was my role.
Mm-hmm.
And had the other team members not completed or done their role, I would not have been able to do mine. There's that acknowledgement, that humility that you really like and value from potential employees, which again I absolutely love. Cathy, thank you very much for coming on to the show today. It's been fantastic. The listeners are going to take so much away from it. So Cathy, where can our listeners reach you if they want to reach out to you?
So they can go to my website, which is thepeoplenavigator.com. And they can also find me on LinkedIn, and I'm on Blue Sky as well.
Cathy, thank you very much. This has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/my-worst-interview-ever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, on the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.